it all behind you. I said, take down everything that stands in your way. Don't stop believing it'll work out again, my friend. Stand out and be a part of everything good. Wake up, you're gonna be all that you should. Try out all the things you always wanted to be. You'll see, 'cause I know what I know, that you've got it in you, and I see that you are a winner.
I thought I would read again. This is from a chapter, or it's a bit from a book by Dan Barker. The book is entitled Godless: How an Evangelical Preacher Became One of America's Leading Atheists. Isn't it funny, whenever the whole question of Jesus' historicity comes up, Christians pull out their little toolkit, their little, I don't know. How do we argue back what these guys are saying? There's no historical evidence. Of course there are. These guys that were born decades upon decades after Jesus was supposedly killed, but they're witnesses and they're proof of Jesus. If I were to write a book report about the antics of Abraham Lincoln, and that was all there was anywhere to show that Abraham Lincoln existed at all, would my book report be proof that Abraham Lincoln existed? Or would it take a little bit more than just somebody who was born a couple centuries later writing about him? Wouldn't it take a little bit more than that? And yet Christians are like, ooh, Flavius Josephus wrote this, or Tacitus wrote that, or however his name is pronounced, who were born like how many decades after Jesus supposedly died? Oh, but this is proof of Jesus. You know? Anyway, I'll just read what I can of this. This is from Dan Barker's chapter called Did Jesus Exist? I would read the whole chapter, but it's very lengthy. Flavius Josephus. My dad's birthday present to me when I turned 19 was a copy of the complete works of Flavius Josephus. When it comes to hard evidence from outside the Bible, this is the most common piece of historical documentation offered by Christian apologists. Outside of the New Testament, Josephus presents the only possible confirmation of the Jesus story from the first century. At first glance, Josephus appears to be the answer to the Christian's apologist dreams. He was a Masonic Jew, not a Christian, so he could not be accused of bias. He did not spend a lot of time or space on his report of Jesus, showing that he was merely reporting facts, not spouting propaganda like the gospel writers. Although he was born in 37 CE and could not have been a contemporary of Jesus, he lived close enough to the time to be considered a valuable second-hand source. Josephus was a highly respected and much quoted Roman historian. He died sometime after the year 100. His two major tomes were the Antiquities of the Jews and the War of the Jews. Antiquities was written sometime after the year 90 CE. It begins, in the beginning God created the heaven and the earth, and arduously parallels the Old Testament up to the time when Josephus is able to add equally tedious historical details of Jewish life during the early Roman period. In Book 18, Chapter 3, this paragraph is encountered Whiston's translation. Now, there was about this time Jesus, a wise man, if it be lawful to call him a man, for he was a doer of wonderful works, a teacher of such men as received the truth with pleasure. He drew over to him both many of the Jews and many of the Gentiles. He was the Christ, and when Pilate, at the suggestion of the principal men amongst us, had condemned him to the cross, those that loved him at the first did not forsake him. For he appeared to them alive again the third day, as the divine prophets had foretold these and 10,000 other wonderful things concerning him, and the tribe of Christians so named from him are not extinct to this day. This truly appears to give historical confirmation for the existence of Jesus, but is it authentic? Most scholars, including most fundamentalist scholars, admit that at least some parts of this paragraph cannot be authentic. Many are convinced that the entire paragraph is a forgery, an interpolation inserted by Christians at a later time. There are at least 7 reasons for this. 1. The paragraph is absent from earlier copies of the works of Josephus. For example, it does not appear in Origen's 2nd century version of Josephus, in Origen Contra Celsum, where Origen fiercely defended Christianity against the heretical views of Celsus. Origen quoted freely from Josephus to prove his points, but never once used this paragraph, which would have been the ultimate ace up his sleeve. In fact, the Josephus paragraph about Jesus does not appear at all until the beginning of the 4th century. So, at the time of Constantine, Bishop Eusebius, not sure I said that right, a close ally of the emperor, was instrumental in crystallizing and defining the version of Christianity that was to become Orthodox. And he is the first person known to have quoted this paragraph of Josephus. Eusebius once wrote that it was a permissible medicine for historians to create fictions, prompting historian Jacob Burckhardt to call Eusebius the first thoroughly dishonest historian of antiquity. Okay. The fact that the Josephus Jesus paragraph shows up at this point in history at a time when interpolations and revisions were quite common and when the emperor was eager to demolish Gnostics, Christianity, I'll read this part again. The fact that the Josephus Jesus paragraph shows up at this point in history at a time when interpolations and revisions were quite common and when the emperor was eager to demolish Gnostic Christianity and replace it with literalistic Christianity makes the passage quite dubious. Many scholars believe that Eusebius, I know I'm saying that name wrong, was the forger and interpolator of the paragraph on Jesus that magically appears in the works of Josephus after more than 2 centuries. Second reason. That's such a long paragraph. There's 7 reasons they think this entire paragraph is a forgery. Okay, second reason. Josephus would not have called Jesus the Christ or the truth. Whoever wrote these phrases was a believing Christian. Josephus was a Messianic Jew, probably saying that wrong too. And if he truly believed Jesus was the long-awaited Messiah, Christ, he certainly would have given more than a passing reference to him. Josephus never converted to Christianity. Origen reported that Josephus was not believing in Jesus as the Christ. Reason number 3. The passage is out of context. Book 18, containing the interval of 32 years from the banishment of Archelaus to the departure from Babylon, starts with the Roman taxation under Cyrenius in 6 CE and talks about various Jewish sects at the time, including the Essenes and a sect of Judas the Galilean, to which he devotes 3 times more space than to Jesus. He discusses Herod's building of various cities, the secession of priests and procurators, and so on. Sorry. Chapter 3 starts with sedition against Pilate, who planned to slaughter all the Jews but changed his mind. Pilate then used sacred money to supply water to Jerusalem. The Jews protested. Pilate sends spies into the Jewish ranks with concealed weapons, and there was a great massacre. Then, in the middle of all these troubles, comes the curiously quiet paragraph about Jesus. Followed immediately by, and about the same time, another terrible misfortune confounded the Jews. Josephus, an Orthodox Jew, would not have thought the Christian story to be another terrible misfortune. If he truly thought Jesus was the Christ, this would have been a glorious story of victory. It is only a Christian, someone like Eusebius, who might have considered Jesus to be a Jewish tragedy. Paragraph 3 can be lifted out of the text with no damage to the chapter. In fact, it flows better without it. Reason number 4, the phrase, "to this day," shows that this is a later interpolation. There was no tribe of Christians during Josephus's time. Christianity did not get off the ground until the 2nd century. Reason number 5. Josephus appears not to know anything else about Jesus outside of this tiny paragraph and an indirect reference concerning James, the brother of Jesus. See below. We'll have to come back to that. He does not refer to the Gospels now known as Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, or to the writings or activities of Paul, though if these stories were in circulation at that time, he ought to have known about them and used them as sources. Like the writings of Paul, Josephus's account is silent about the teachings or miracles of Jesus, although he reports the antics of other prophets in great detail. He makes no mention of the earthquake or eclipse at the crucifixion, which would have been universally known in that area if they had truly happened. He adds nothing to the gospel narratives and says nothing that would not have been believed by Christians already, whether in the 1st or 4th century. In all of Josephus's voluminous works, there is not a single reference to Christianity anywhere outside of this tiny paragraph. He relates much more about John the Baptist than about Jesus. He lists the activities of many other self-proclaimed messiahs, including Judas of Galilee, Theudas the magician, and the Egyptian Jew Messiah, but is mute about the life of one whom he claims, if he wrote it, is the answer to his Masonic hopes. 6. The paragraph mentions that the divine prophets foretold the life of Jesus, but Josephus neglects to mention who these prophets were or what they said. In no other place does Josephus connect any Hebrew prediction with the life of Jesus. If Jesus truly had been the fulfillment of divine prophecy, as Christians believe, and Josephus was made to say, he would have been the one learned enough to document it. 7. The hyperbolic language of the paragraph is uncharacteristic of a careful historian. As the divine prophets had foretold these and 10,000 other wonderful things concerning him, this sounds more like sectarian propaganda. I know I said that wrong, sorry. In other words, more like the New Testament than objective reporting. It is very unlike Josephus. Christians should be careful when they refer to Josephus as historical confirmation for Jesus. If we remove the forged paragraph, as we should, the works of Josephus become evidence against historicity. Some Christian scholars are honest enough, however, to acknowledge these problems. How could they not? Agreeing that tampering has occurred, yet insisting that the passage can be undoctored to uncover an original, plainer report by Josephus that was later modified by someone like Eusebius, whatever. Sorry, I can't say his name. This is not the Bible after all. If we remove the fraudulent "he was the Christ and to this day" and 10,000 other wonderful things and so on, we can still spot an unvarnished second-hand recognition of the existence of Jesus, these scholars insist, but then you have to wonder where to draw the line. How do Christians prove it was only part of the paragraph and not the entire thing that was dishonestly added to the antiquities? And even if they can do that, doesn't this prove too much? Instead of raising our confidence in the reliability of ancient writings, doesn't this actually demonstrate that at least some early Christians were eager to falsify documents? If you admit there was a propensity for believers to tamper with evidence, how do you know they kept their grubby hands off the New Testament? Those who would try to rescue Josephus with this tactic are shooting themselves in the foot. The Bible has been tampered with, and the argument that saves one damns the other. There is one other passage in the Antiquities that mention Jesus as an aside. It is Book 20, Chapter 9. Festus was now dead, and Albinus was put upon the road, so he assembled the Sanhedrin of judges, and brought before them the brother of Jesus, who was called Christ, whose name was James, and some others, or some of his companions. And when he had formed an accusation against them as breakers of the law, he delivered them to be stoned. This is flimsy, and even Christian scholars widely consider this to be a doctored text. The stoning of James is not mentioned in Acts. Hegesippus, a Jewish Christian in 170 CE, wrote a history of the church, saying that James, the brother of Jesus, was killed in a riot, not by sentence of a court. Clement confirms this, quoted by Eusebius. Most scholars agree that Josephus is referring to another James here, possibly the same one that Paul mentions in Acts, because Paul didn't know James, Jesus' brother. Sorry, I just had to say that. Where was I? Who led a sect in Jerusalem. Instead of strengthening Christianity, this brother of Jesus interpolation contradicts history. Again, if Josephus truly thought Jesus was the Christ, he would have added more about him than a casual aside in somebody else's story. Josephus was a native of Judea and a contemporary of the apostles. He was governor of Galilee for a time, the province in which Jesus allegedly lived and taught. He traversed every part of this province, writes Remsburg, and visited the places where but a generation before Christ had performed his prodigies. He resided in Cana, the very city in which Christ is said to have wrought his first miracle. He mentions every noted personage of Palestine and describes every important event that occurred there during the first 70 years of the Christian era. But Christ was of too little consequence, and his deeds too trivial to merit a line from this historian's pen.